It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.
Hey guys, Tyler here. More recently, Nintendo has announced the Switch 2, and of course the price for the Switch 2 is going to be $450 to purchase the console. Now, when it comes down to the price of games that are directly done by Nintendo, the games digitally are going to cost around $80, and that the physical copy would cost over $90. So for this video, we'll ask the question, is Nintendo actually justified in selling the Switch games for over $80 to $90 for both digital and physical copies? One major argumentation that I've been seeing on social media is that the games from the 1980s or the 1990s were actually expensive, and so what Nintendo is doing is not necessarily new. They would charge up to $90 to $100 in the past for video games, and so this is actually just a repeat of history. First and foremost, I'm actually a 90s kid. I grew up during that time period, so I know exactly the environment that they're basically describing about when it comes down to expensive games in the past. So here's a few things to consider. In the past, when games were actually super uber expensive, like over $80 to $90 or some cases $100 more, what we did back then was actually rent the games directly at places like Blockbuster or Hollywood Video.
The perfect video store. It would have a great selection, right? Right! Over 10,000 videos. 3 evening rentals, so no rush, no hassle. Fast checkout. 24-hour quick drop return. Open late every night. Well, the perfect video store.
Welcome to Blockbuster Video.
Is popping up all over the country. There's one near you.
Blockbuster Video. Wow, what a difference.
Now you can rent all new releases or anything else for 5 days.
Really?
Yeah, so you can just enjoy it at your own pace. At other video stores, you only get 1 day on new releases. So you can't enjoy it because you're too worried about getting it back on time. And then you gotta fly out the door in order to get to the video store before it closes. And the clock is ticking, the phone is ringing, the late fees are piling up so high.
He's really into special effects.
Kids nowadays have no sort of idea whatsoever about the notion of a rental store like a Blockbuster or Hollywood Video. And the main reason why I say that is because the concept of a rental store is practically non-existent nowadays. And so back in the past, Blockbuster had an opportunity to acquire Netflix. However, they reject that offer, and that's the main reason why there's practically almost no Blockbusters in America today. The second major aspect that we need to consider is the fact that cartridges and CDs were way more expensive in the past in comparison to now to manufacture. Look, cartridges have been around since at least the 1970s, starting with the Atari 2600 and probably the Odyssey even earlier than that. And also, Nintendo uses cartridges in the past, Sega used cartridges in the past for the Genesis, and so basically in the past, for many games, they used cartridges. And of course, with the introduction of the Nintendo 64, they introduced the idea of 3D graphics. And so the notion of a 3D graphics for cartridge games were fairly new in the past, and so they were much more expensive to actually produce. Additionally, CDs were also relatively new in the past, because basically CDs have been around, I would say, at least the 80s. And so when they started to produce games with CDs on them, basically that's like a new technology that it was not necessarily commonplace. And so because of the small size to fit the files on the CDs, some games in the past actually had more than one CD for the PS1. And so because of manufacturing costs of CDs in the past, that's why the games were also very much expensive. However, we do know as technology, continues to develop, things become much more cheaper. Also, let's consider the value of the game in the past in comparison to the present. First and foremost, in the past, there was no such thing as downloadable content. When you bought a game for around $70, $80, $90 in the past, basically that's the full game. There was no such thing as DLC. I think starting with the Xbox 360 and the Wii, as well as the PS3, basically the idea of DLC has become more and more commonplace. The ideas of microtransactions became more and more commonplace. So when you bought a game in the past, you actually pay the full price and you actually have the full game without any type of DLC whatsoever. Another aspect of value in the past would be the case of instruction manuals. Yes, instruction manuals. In the past, video games used to have instruction manuals that actually went all out. Now, this right here is an example of an instruction manual that comes directly from my copy of Jack's Tree. And yes, every single game in the past actually had instruction manuals how to play the game, give you insight about the history of the game, how to control the controls, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, ever since I would say the 360 times, it became increasingly less common for players to get instruction manuals. And so you had a lot more value in the past in comparison to the present. Another aspect that Nintendo announced during their Nintendo Direct conference was that there are some games that require you to actually download the full game for the cartridge. And the cartridge itself cannot fit certain games, and so that's why you have to download certain games. The thing about games in the past were that once you buy a copy of that game, it is the full copy of the game. And because it's actually the full copy of the game, that meant you don't have to worry about not having the whole entire content, or the game is not necessarily unplayable. Because games nowadays are largely reliant directly by the internet, what if, for example, the server comes out one day after a certain amount of years of the Switch 2? That will mean that if you don't actually have a chance to actually download the game content or DLC or patches or firmware, whatever, at that particular moment, that renders the game unplayable potentially in the future. And so in the past, you actually own the full game without direct reliance on the internet. And so at any given moment, if you were to buy a digital copy of the game, a company can theoretically take down the game that you actually purchased digitally, and you don't actually own it. By the way, I'm not necessarily exaggerating either. There are some cases where companies have in fact taken down content that was purchased directly by users that were actually digital, and as part of the licensing agreement, it would say that they had the right to take down the content that they actually purchased. One final aspect of the announcement was that Nintendo decides to, of course, upcharge people to upgrade their Switch titles to Switch 2 titles, because apparently to actually play the same game that you owned in the past, you have to pay some money to actually play it. Oh, and you also have to pay money for a tech demo too. So based upon the available data, it seems as though to me that this is actually a case of Nintendo being so incredibly anti-consumer and very greedy. But what do you guys think about this announcement for the Switch 2? Tell me in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see you guys next video.
It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.